new psychological study from the National Institute of Mental Health.
Just this morning, along with his longtime
Circle
psychiatrist.
of depression is growing wider, broader.
15% of women suffer from this disorder.
Affecting over 20 million Americans. Changes that have occurred in the brain.
Abnormalities in the neurotransmitters.
She's got a problem, and they've got a drug.
6 million American kids take prescribed medication.
Psychiatric care.
But what if the criminal is mentally ill? The punishment, a form of aversion therapy.
10-minute cures on the show, but I want to...
Oppositional defiant disorder.
Schools criticized for over-prescription.
Donde quiera que mires, ahí está. ¿Piensas que la psiquiatría no tiene nada que ver contigo? Piénsalo otra vez. Todo el campo de la psiquiatría se ha metido en cada faceta de tu vida.
They basically believe that everyone is mentally ill.
You smoke too much, it's a disease. You're too unhappy, it's a disease. You're too thin, it's a disease. You're too fat, it's a disease.
Where are these coming from? These are coming from the minds of psychiatrists that are dreaming these things up, writing papers and getting published with their names on it, creating these new diseases.
First he said that I had ADD. Then he said that I was depressed. Then he said I might be bipolar, but I don't have ADD anymore.
And he said, you know, I've been noticing you, and I wonder if you have it too.
What they decided is that both my husband and my son had a chemical imbalance that needed to be corrected with a chemical balancer.
There is not one shred of credible evidence that any respectable scientist would consider valid, demonstrating that anything that psychiatrists call mental illness are brain diseases or biochemical imbalances. It's all fraud.
There's no reliability of diagnosis, and there is no science. It's just pseudoscience. It's pretend science.
This is one of the most open secrets in all of America in the psychiatric field, that nothing is being done that's legitimate, and they're billing for it.
Los psiquiatras afirman que más de 1.000 millones de los habitantes del planeta están mentalmente enfermos. En los últimos 30 años han prescrito medicinas psiquiátricas a 543 millones de personas. Y ahora mismo drogan a 17 millones de estudiantes con estimulantes y antidepresivos. Al preguntarles recientemente sobre la base científica de su profesión, los psiquiatras dispuestos a ser entrevistados no ofrecieron más que excusas.
Psychiatric illness is not really illness.
How do you evaluate if someone is cured or sick?
Cure is certainly something we look forward to. We had no earthly idea how to accomplish.
We're not good at causes. We don't know what causes mental illness.
Pero eso no les ha impedido declararse expertos en salud mental y tratar a la gente en contra de su voluntad. ¿Y los resultados?
This psychiatrist, man who's supposed to work to heal people, has done nothing but destroy this man's life, and in destroying his life, destroying the lives of all of his loved ones. Excuse me.
They've damaged and ruined my son, and they've trapped him in a system.
The way that they treated him and made him feel like he was worthless.
Bryant was being kept dumb and high on Ritalin so that they could make $2,500 per month.
He gave me Valium, and I got addicted to it.
It wiped out my life.
My life has been ruined. My joy has been stolen.
She was laying there. She took two gasps of air and died right there in front of me.
It is really tragic. It's awful. And it's being done for money. That's why it's being done.
Oh, it's got to be in the billions. I don't know the exact number, but it's got to be in the billions. It's just unbelievable.
This is so big that it boggles the mind.
Toma la tragedia humana que acabas de ver y multiplícala por millones. En las últimas 4 décadas murieron en hospitales psiquiátricos del gobierno casi el doble de americanos que en todas las guerras de Estados Unidos desde 1776. Las compañías de seguros pagan $69 mil millones al año por servicios psiquiátricos, doblando el costo de las primas de seguros médicos. Y mientras se embolsan más de $2 billones al año, los psiquiatras no pueden mostrar ni una sola cura. ¿Difícil de creer? Eso es exactamente con lo que cuentan. Y como te mostraremos, esa es la forma en que desde el principio se han salido con la suya.
The roots of psychiatry have to do with control, power, and alienation from certain groups of people who were uncomfortable to be around. They were locked up in these places to get them out of the way. The history of psychiatry, I think, really is related to institutions.
El Hospital Bethlehem Royal de Londres fue una de las primeras instituciones psiquiátricas del mundo. Conocido comúnmente como Bedlam, el hospital no era más que un depósito para quienes se creía que estaban locos. Se encerraba a los internos en jaulas, closets y establos, se les encadenaba a la pared y se les azotaba, mientras el hospital cobraba la admisión para que el público los viera. En el siglo XVIII, William Barry fue el primero en promover que sus hospitales podían curar a los enfermos mentales. Los manicomios de Barry lo hicieron el hombre más rico de Inglaterra, aunque sus tratamientos eran tan inhumanos como los practicados en Bedlam sin un solo paciente curado. Su éxito financiero desencadenó un auge en el negocio de los manicomios y la oportunidad para que los psiquiatras se aprovecharan de esta nueva industria.
This was an era where, on both sides of the Atlantic, specialized institutions for the mentally ill are beginning to be built in large numbers. Those institutions date back certainly to the beginning of the 18th century, and in a few cases even earlier than that. But the explosive growth of an asylum sector, of asylumdom, as some historians have called it, is very much a 19th century phenomenon. It's that period when the state is persuaded to invest tax dollars in building these places.
Pero mientras los que dirigían los hospitales se hacían ricos, a los psiquiatras, sin embargo, les faltaba credibilidad para aumentar al máximo sus ingresos.
In order to justify their profession, they needed to come up with these biological solutions, or they didn't have any profession. The only way for them to solve that was to attempt to start believing that these people that were suffering from emotional disorders was from a biological basis. Whatever was done to make this person more manageable would be simply called a treatment. And the sad reality is that many of these so-called treatments were, in essence, torture.
The near-drowning devices that were developed in this period, for example, must have been appallingly frightening. For example, one device involved putting the patient into a coffin, closing the lid, and dumping it into a bath of water, and then opening it up and trying to revive the patient. There were a range of these things, and the mortality rate was very, very high.
Entonces, los psiquiatras buscaron dar crédito a su ejercicio disfrazándolo con el lenguaje de la medicina. El darle una nueva imagen al tratamiento se llegó a conocer como modelo médico.
Somebody who's really hyper and manic, if you're wrapped up in a cold sheet and dunked into some water, you're going to quit acting manic because that's a punishing treatment. But as soon as the symptoms started to go away, they started to believe that somehow by wrapping them up and dunking them in cold water, it was draining the toxics out of their body. So they built the medical model around that.
Llevando más allá la teoría biológica de la enfermedad mental, un americano, Benjamin Rush, propuso la idea de que la locura la causaba demasiada sangre en la cabeza. ¿La cura? Quitar la sangre por cualquier medio. Inmovilización, agua helada, sangrado, incluso el terror. Y con eso se creó un nuevo modelo médico.
Benjamin Rush was probably the most famous American physician of the Revolutionary era. Rush was known as the master bleeder. He bled his patients for madness. He also invented something called the tranquilizer. It's a chair that looks a little bit like an electric chair. The patient was confined in this apparatus, sometimes with cold water applied to his or her head, for some hours at a time, and Rush announces in a letter that he's invented this new contraption and dubbed it the tranquilizer.
Los procedimientos a menudo letales de Rush se detallaron en su manual de 1812, que siguió siendo la fuente autorizada de la psiquiatría durante 70 años. Era tan venerado que en 1965 a Rush lo consagraron como el padre de la psiquiatría americana en el sello de la Asociación Psiquiátrica Americana. A fines del siglo XIX, los crecientes fracasos de la psiquiatría en curar la locura amenazaban sus ganancias financieras, obligándolos a inventar nuevos modelos médicos.
The cures promised when was delivered. So by the 1860s and 70s, a growing mood of pessimism was covering Europe and North America, that effectively the new institutions were ever growing in size but not growing in their effectiveness.
El siglo XX trajo más modelos médicos. El psiquiatra americano Henry Cotton mutilaba a sus pacientes quitándoles partes del cuerpo y declaró que este era un gran avance para tratar enfermedades mentales.
The earliest target was the teeth and then the tonsils and the sinuses. But when patients didn't get better, the enthusiasts for this treatment then started to move down the body and to say, well, obviously patients have swallowed bacteria in their saliva, so stomachs need to go, spleens need to go, colons need to go.
Al aumentar la indignación del público por la tortura y mutilación de pacientes, los psiquiatras inventaron nuevos métodos, cada uno aclamado como cura milagrosa. Pero cada uno no resultó ser más eficaz ni menos brutal que el anterior.
This is a history of psychiatry, more or less, to damage the patient. I mean, this is a version of the original model, which was to chain them like animals.
If you're doing it to somebody because you insist that they have to change, and you're going to do that by turning the screws, you might say, whether it's with medication, restraint, whatever, that's torture. And a huge part of what psychiatry has done really comes down to torture.
Al avanzar el siglo XX, la psiquiatría continuó buscando legitimidad al transformarse en disciplina médica. Pero solo lograron crear formas más eficientes para infligir tortura mental y física y la muerte. Un legado que ha continuado hasta la psiquiatría moderna con su modelo médico más redituable hasta hoy, la drogadicción masiva de millones de personas. Pero para lograrlo, los psiquiatras primero tenían que destrozar una de las creencias más preciadas de la humanidad, decretando que la gente no era lo que pensaba que era. Universidad de Leipzig, Alemania, 1879. El profesor Wilhelm Wundt experimenta con los sentidos humanos. Wundt declara que los pensamientos, personalidad y comportamiento del hombre no son más que reacciones químicas del cerebro.
Wundt became frustrated with his inability to change behavior because he was dealing with the original, psychology. That's the psyche, that's the soul. He created a new science, which was based on man being an animal without a soul, to be trained. Not to be a thinker, but to be trained.
Estudiantes de todo el mundo se reunieron para estudiar la nueva definición del hombre por Wundt como un organismo sin alma. El espíritu de la época lo resumió el filósofo alemán Friedrich Nietzsche.
Gott ist tot. Gott bleibt tot. Wir haben ihn umgebracht.
Siguiendo la teoría de Wundt, el ruso Ivan Pavlov experimentó con animales buscando métodos de modificar el comportamiento.
Pavlov studied in Wilhelm Wundt's laboratory in Leipzig, Germany, in the late 1800s. And he experimented with dogs, with electrodes and stimulus response, denying privileges to denying rewards.
And he noticed that when you brought out some food in front of animals, dogs in particular, that they would begin to salivate. So he'd ring the bell at the same time that he brought the food out, and then eventually, instead of bringing the food out, he just rang the bell, and of course the dogs got all excited. He called that a conditioned reflex.
Los primeros sujetos humanos de Pavlov fueron niños. Les perforaba la mejilla para reunir y medir su saliva.
Pavlovian conditioning became one of the major foundations of a lot of behavioral science research in the 20th century.
La idea de que se podía controlar el comportamiento con condicionamiento repetitivo se conocía como conductismo.
The behaviorists believed that all children are animals and can be trained as animals. This was the view of behaviorists. As a matter of fact, John Watson, the most famous of the behaviorists, says that you have to treat human beings or look at human beings the way you would look at the ox you slaughter. See, the behavior is not interested in what's up in your head or your soul because they don't believe there is a soul.
El sucesor de Watson, el psicólogo de Harvard B.F. Skinner, creía que todo comportamiento podía manipularse para adaptarse a cualquier fin que el psicólogo conductista buscase.
Skinner developed what's called operant conditioning, where he was able to demonstrate you can change animal behavior by certain schedules of reinforcement, by giving them rewards at certain times, and then you can teach pigeons to play ping pong, for example, and you can teach rats to run mazes. And you can teach human beings to seek certain economic or societal rewards.
Skinner could actually shape new behavior patterns, and this actually was the sort of thing he quite soon became very famous for.
Quizás su experimento más famoso era la caja de Skinner.
He was designing a Skinner box, which is something like a big playpen, but everything in it's controlled. The temperature's controlled, the light's controlled, and so on. And the idea is then you present children with certain stimuli that you want them to learn to react to.
Durante casi un año, Skinner aisló a su hija en una caja, similar a las que se construyen para las ratas.
The child was stimulated and had to respond in a certain way, like a chicken or a rat in a cage, because they firmly believe that children are animals. If you believe, though, that a child is a human being, you can't train him like a rat.
Hoy, el Instituto Nacional de Salud Mental de Estados Unidos paga casi $40 millones al año del dinero de los contribuyentes para la investigación de psicología conductista. Un total de $19,000 millones desde 1948. Con esos fondos, los psiquiatras aplican las mismas técnicas de condicionamiento desarrolladas por Pavlov, Watson y Skinner. Un buen ejemplo, un centro de detención juvenil donde se conecta a los niños a baterías de 270 voltios y se les dan choques en la llamada terapia de aversión.
Antoine was having a number of problems because he was up at a center that was shocking him every time he did anything. There was a button on a little, almost like a TV remote, that would be used and pushed.
They will get an additional shock for trying to remove the electrode. So they're expected to sit there and let this electricity pass through their skin without trying to remove it. If they yell in anticipation of the shock, they will shock the student an additional time for yell.
The cost to send a student to Judge Rottenberg from New York is about $214,000 per student. These students are tortured. They're given this electric shock therapy for no other reason but to inflict pain.
Otras técnicas incluyen el administrar electrochoques para tratar el desvío sexual, el lanzar fuertes impulsos magnéticos al cráneo para interrumpir la actividad cerebral y el disparar alto voltaje a través de electrodos implantados quirúrgicamente para reprimir el comportamiento problemático, lo que cuesta hasta $100,000 por paciente. Y mientras esta ciencia sin alma llevó a técnicas de modificación del comportamiento que aún generan miles de millones de dólares en investigación y tratamientos, también cimentó otro movimiento psiquiátrico que causaría la muerte de millones de personas.
January 1945. As World War II comes to a close, the full horror of Hitler's final solution is exposed, with grotesque killing factories unparalleled in human history. Mass graves filled with corpses of men, women, and children, murdered by starvation, bullets, and poison gas. What could drive men to commit such atrocities against their fellow human beings?
La respuesta es la pseudociencia llamada eugenesia, creada y promovida por psiquiatras décadas antes de que los nazis llegaran al poder.
The eugenics movement got started in 1883 with Francis Galton, and he felt that human beings should take evolution in their own hands, and that the most talented individuals, the most healthy individuals, the most attractive individuals should have more offspring.
There was great concern that people that they considered had poor genes were reproducing faster than the people they considered had good genes.
They felt that a medical solution might be the proper one. This is what led to the sterilization movement.
It resulted in sterilization of mentally ill people, sterilization of retarded people, sterilization of people we don't like politically and sociologically. So the problem is not with genetics. The problem is a pretend phony genetics used to justify inhumane social policies.
Aunque nunca se ha probado que sea más que una teoría, a principios del siglo XX, la eugenesia se había extendido a casi 30 países, de Inglaterra a Brasil, México, Suecia, Rusia y en particular Estados Unidos, donde la esterilización forzada se practicaba ampliamente.
Eugenics movement in Germany was somewhat different than the eugenics movement in the United States in that there were many more physicians and psychiatrists. Alfred Plutz was one of the pioneers in the German eugenics movement and how to control the population of those whom he considered inferior. In 1905, along with his brother-in-law, Ernst Ruden, he established the first organization for racial hygiene.
Alle Nationen haben sich mit einer außergewöhnlich großen Menge an minderwertigen, schwachen, kranken und Verkrüppelten abzugeben. Durch kluge Gesetze über Sterilisation würden wir auch in der Lage sein, den vernünftigsten Weg der Zeugung herbeizuführen.
Hitler particularmente admiraba al eugenicista americano Madison Grant. Hitler proclamó que el libro de Grant, La desaparición de la gran raza, era su Biblia personal. En su libro Mi lucha, Hitler aclamó la eugenesia como la ciencia que reconstruiría Alemania.
Körperlich oder geistig gesund ist, dem ist es nicht erlaubt, seine Krankheit an seine Kinder weiterzugeben. Das Recht auf persönliche Freiheit wird durch seine Pflicht, die Rasse zu beschützen, eingeschränkt.
The German eugenicists welcomed the Nazi advent to power because the Nazi program could fund the very programs that they had in mind. The Nazis gave them political support, financial support, and conversely, the psychiatrists gave the Nazis a medical justification for their genocidal policies.
Something like 40% of German psychiatrists had joined the SS by 1933. They weren't forced into the SS, they just joined it naturally, because the beliefs were very, very similar.
Ruden and his work led directly to the decision to move from sterilization to murder.
Su plan era sencillo. Primero, convencer al público que los débiles mentales querían escapar de la carga de su existencia, pero no podían expresarlo, y que matarlos era un acto piadoso. Luego, extender la definición de inferior para incluir a los testigos de Jehová, judíos, gitanos, homosexuales, todos indignos de vivir. Los psiquiatras produjeron películas de propaganda, conocidas como películas de matanza nazi, proyectadas en los 5.300 cines de Alemania.
Geisteskrankheit ist als ein Erbübel eine der größten Gefahren für die Volksgesundheit. Irrtum ist, dass sich solche Kranken glücklich fühlen und am Leben hängen. Sie haben überhaupt kein Daseinsbewusstsein. Wer von ihr befallen wird, dem ist die schwerste Last des Schicksals auferlegt. Ein Dasein ohne Leben.
It first started with passive violence, which is starvation,
It then intensified to lethal injections, and finally it developed into systematic gassing and cremation.
Su sede se estableció en Berlín, con el infame nombre en código de T4.
T4 program was named after Tiergarten 4, which essentially resulted over a period of time in the murder of about 70,000 people who were deemed mentally retarded, emotionally distraught, or physically handicapped by the Germans. They were called life unworthy of living.
El asesinato se probó en hospitales psiquiátricos de Alemania y luego llegó a los campos de concentración, con los psiquiatras alemanes más importantes como verdugos. Paul Nishi, el director de T4, declaró:
Das Aussortieren in den Konzentrationslagern lief etwa genauso ab wie in den Nervenheilanstalten. Und mit selbigen Erfassungsbögen.
6 million Jews died in concentration camps and as a result of Nazi extermination policies. Rudin congratulated Hitler for making his, that is Rudin's, 30-year dream come true.
Después de la rendición nazi, se realizó un Tribunal Internacional de Justicia para enjuiciar a la psiquiatría por sus crímenes de guerra. Pero los psiquiatras americanos, temiendo un golpe permanente al futuro de la psiquiatría, intervinieron, echándole la culpa a unos cuantos psiquiatras alemanes.
There were some doctors who were prosecuted, but very few. Ernst Rudin returned to Switzerland at the end of the war. He did not serve any prison time.
One of the strangest things of all about the legacy of Nazi science is that some of the nastiest psychiatric eugenicists at the end of the war went back to work either in Germany or sometimes in the United States.
Lo que empezó como un plan psiquiátrico para eliminar a la indeseable humanidad, ahora se ha esparcido por el mundo civilizado y fue responsable del asesinato de 11 millones de personas. Los psiquiatras, nunca llevados ante la justicia, como verás, continúan promoviendo la eugenesia en todo el mundo. Y hoy vemos los resultados en el racismo, la miseria humana y el conflicto social sin fin.
After World War II, a new eugenics was resurrected out of the bones and ashes of the old eugenics. The eugenics movement has been at the forefront to establish a new scientific racism that justifies oppression and exploitation and racism.
De hecho, el racismo es inseparable de las raíces de la psiquiatría.
The entire history of psychiatry, beginning with scientific conclusions that were made in the 1830s, was an effort to prove the intellectual inferiority of African Americans.
Benjamin Rush is the father of modern psychiatry. And he is the one that gave us the term nigritude. He said that all blacks have inherited this disease. And this particular disease, it caused them to be inferior. In addition to that, it was the reason why it was very important that blacks remain segregated and separate from whites so that whites did not inherit this disease.
Afirmando que la negritud era una forma de lepra, Rush justificó la segregación como una necesidad médica, y eso se volvió un argumento para continuar la esclavitud.
The fact that you have brutalized a whole group of people had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with some genetic link, and that basically you were just a diseased person, so when a slave master wanted to get rid of a recalcitrant slave, they could just say, oh, well, they're suffering from this disease.
Drapetomania, that is the name of the mental disorder that was contrived by Samuel Cartwright, who said that blacks have a mental disorder if they had a desire to run away from slavery.
Running away became such a common problem that psychiatrists attempted to give that a disease. He says, but that's a cure for that. And the question was, well, what's the cure for that? Frequent whippings, frequent whippings. You'd be surprised how that disease clears up when the lash is put in place of their excuses.
Después que se abolió la esclavitud, el racismo psiquiátrico no solo persistió, se intensificó. la revista americana de psiquiatría oficialmente declaró que como los negros eran descendientes de salvajes y caníbales, no estaban listos para una civilización superior, mientras su pseudociencia de la eugenesia aumentó sus actividades racistas.
There is a clear and long and intimate connection between the eugenics movement and the Ku Klux Klan. Harry Laughlin, who was the Carnegie Institution's director of the Eugenics Record Office, had a close relationship to the Ku Klux Klan through the publication of a book called White America, which was written by a major Klan leader. So Laughlin wrote a glowing review of the book in the Eugenics News. And at the same time, you have the Ku Klux Klan using eugenics to justify their racist goals.
Pero el racismo psiquiátrico no era exclusivo de Estados Unidos. Algunos de los peores abusos del siglo XX ocurrieron en Sudáfrica, donde el gobierno adoptó las mismas teorías y prácticas racistas utilizadas por Hitler. Esto no fue coincidencia. El primer ministro había estudiado eugenesia como estudiante de psicología en la naciente Alemania nazi de los años 20.
Dr. Henrik Verwoerd is regarded as the architect of apartheid. He saw South Africa as a divided state with whites, blacks and brown people living in totally separate areas, with black people having no rights whatsoever.
Con el apartheid implementado, los psiquiatras establecieron hospitales mentales por todo el país, que de hecho no eran más que campos de esclavos.
These places operated under a private company by the name of Smith, Mitchell and Company. They were saving money through the cheap accommodation for psychiatric patients, while making massive fortune out of money that Parliament had appropriated for medication. So it was a corrupt system.
Cuando finalmente se sacó a la luz esta operación, se descubrió que 67,000 presos habían perecido, mientras al mismo tiempo los psiquiatras habían cobrado $117 millones en fondos del gobierno sudafricano. La Organización Mundial de la Salud publicó un informe declarando que la psiquiatría cultivaba el racismo y que el apartheid tenía paralelos en la posesión y trata de esclavos. En 1971, en Estados Unidos, el psiquiatra Louis Jolly West, continuando el legado de racismo de la psiquiatría, ideó un experimento secreto de terapia de aversión llamado Centro de Violencia. Su plan, financiado por el gobierno, era implantar electrodos en el cerebro de hombres afroamericanos e hispanos para darles choques si mostraban cualquier comportamiento violento. Y si eso no funcionaba, castrarlos químicamente con drogas. Cuando la proposición racista de West enfrentó la indignación del público, el plan se archivó. Aunque las implacables teorías racistas de la psiquiatría fueron neutralizadas, no fueron detenidas. En 1994, el psicólogo Richard Herrnstein, coautor de La curva de Campana, afirmó probar que los negros eran genéticamente discapacitados y, por tanto, inferiores a los blancos.
The bell curve really argues a very old eugenics idea. It argues that people are born with different kinds of intellectual abilities, that these are inborn pretty much at birth. It goes back to the notion that somehow black people are genetically and biologically inferior to white people as a way to justify what was really its programs of social racism and social sexism. And you see that kind of thinking going on in public school testing and IQ testing and educational testing and tracking.
And this new tool fit into that old mold. It was a new tool that could prove the intellectual inferiority of African Americans.
Psychiatric profession has done great damage, certainly in the past, and far too many in the present, too, to subvert democracy and perpetuate racial stereotypes, even more, deep racism in society.
We have to battle against this continual misinformation, disinformation, pseudoscience. It can be repackaged in whatever form or format it is. But if it is based solely upon the color of one's skin and then is the merit of that human being, I just reject it.
Y hoy, la llama del odio continúa ardiendo, alimentada por mentiras pseudocientíficas. Este es el legado de la psiquiatría, como justificación para el racismo y pretexto para la represión política.
быть верными коммунистическим идеалам, убежденно, с революционной настойчивостью претворять в жизнь ленинский завет, учиться коммунизму, трудиться самоотверженно, по-коммунистически, всей жизнью своей, утверждать на земле дело Ленина, дело партии. Клянемся!
El régimen soviético exigía absoluta lealtad. A quienes no acataban la disciplina del partido se les consideraba disidentes y les llamaban enemigos del Estado. Con un solo susurro a la policía secreta, desaparecían en uno de los hospitales psiquiátricos especiales. A pesar del riesgo, los llamados disidentes pusieron en acción sus ideas de libertad.
Я вел жизнь тайную, конспиративную. Никто не знал, что я это делаю. У меня была маленькая подпольная типография. И я стал делать листовки.
Mientras que otros se consideraban ciudadanos soviéticos leales.
Я, например, считал, и уверенно считал, что я один из лучших советских людей. Когда уже даже меня арестовали и написали особо опасный государственный присуд, я рассмеялся. Я при нем, при этом же самом нынешнем генерале, рассмеялся. А он меня вызывает психиатра на утро.
Según los psiquiatras soviéticos, todos sufrían de inflexibilidad de convicciones, síntoma de un nuevo trastorno, esquizofrenia inactiva.
Вот когда допьешься, тогда я заем. Так, до конца пей.
Пей, ну просто я буду с ним. Ребята, ну заставьте его.
Давай пей, брат.
Igual que sus homólogos en otros países, los psiquiatras soviéticos prescribían poderosas drogas para curar a sus pacientes.
Они никогда их с удовольствием не принимали. И находят пути их не принимать. Мы обязаны просмотреть прием лекарств, потому что больные лекарства дошли до больного. Вот они где-то уже, как говорится, в горле проглатывают, все, ротовая полость чистая. И потом вот такие делают какие-то движения, отрыгивают.
Врач на обходе говорит, как себя чувствуете, Петр Петрович? Я говорю, послушайте, вот, там, когда 5 кубиков галоперидола, туда, например, слюна до полу, там перекошенность вся, значит, одни мышцы растягиваются, другие сокращаются. Совершенно ужасные позы, лицо все ужасное, на душе страшно просто. Я человека, вот самое главное, описать это состояние невозможно.
Санитары совершенно безнаказанно могли избивать. По любому поводу. Или вообще без повода. Вот, например, санитар открывает дверь, и тут, тут ты оказался, например, в проеме двери. И вот этого достаточно было, чтобы, скажем, получить удар. Если больной, скажем, оказывал сопротивление при избиении, то его могли привязать, и привязывали, и избивали, и продолжали избивать уже привязанного.
Проходит, допустим, год-два, там выписывают убийц, выписывают насильников. Михаил, ты бы лучше убил бы кого-нибудь, мне бы легче было тебя отсюда вытолкнуть. Это было, вот, рождало такое чувство безысходности.
De 1967 a 1987, el gobierno soviético arrestó a más de 2 millones de personas, a las que por razones políticas se les diagnosticó mentalmente enfermas y se les obligó a recibir tratamiento psiquiátrico. Aún hoy, la psiquiatría sigue siendo la herramienta de coacción que eligen gobiernos de todo el mundo.
What we've learned is that in Gitmo or Guantanamo Bay, that we had teams of healthcare professionals called the biscuit teams, behavioral scientists, psychologists, working with the military to advise them on how far you could push a prisoner. There are abuses that have been documented around the world. We have healthcare professionals who have committed potentially acts of treason within their medical ethics. And there's nobody supervising that. There's nobody making them stand accountable to their medical ethics.
Pero los psiquiatras nunca han reservado la tortura física y mental exclusivamente para los presos políticos. A lo largo de la historia le han dado una nueva imagen y han hecho que el público la acepte como terapia. A partir de los años 20, los psiquiatras adoptaron una nueva serie de procedimientos que según ellos funcionaban al ocasionarle daño intencional al cerebro.
Manfred Sockel had this notion that he could kill just the bad brain cells, that somehow we have good brain cells, we have bad brain cells. So if you give people enough insulin, you kill those bad brain cells, and if the person survived this epilepsy, they would be better off for it.
A pesar de que las convulsiones le causaron grave daño a la médula espinal al 40% de los pacientes, Sockel señaló el estado infantil obtenido y declaró que su tratamiento era un éxito. Se construyeron salas de insulina en los hospitales y la terapia del coma se volvió un gran negocio. Para no ser superado, Ladislaus von Meduna de Hungría creía que él podía erradicar la enfermedad mental provocando convulsiones para dañar el cerebro con una droga llamada metrazol.
He noticed his epileptics had no mental health problems, and his mental health patients, his psychiatric patients, seemed to have no epilepsy, and so he thought doing one would obviate the other.
The theory was that epilepsy and schizophrenia couldn't coexist in the same brain, and that if epilepsy was induced, that a seizure was caused, it would, quote, drive out the schizophrenia. There's no scientific basis for this whatsoever.
El metrazol era rápido y lucrativo. En una mañana, un solo psiquiatra podía químicamente poner a 50 pacientes en un estado dócil y manejable. Para 1939, el metrazol era tan popular entre los psiquiatras y su personal que se usaba en el 70% de los hospitales de Estados Unidos y en casi todos los demás países del mundo. El éxito financiero de la insulina y del metrazol motivó el desarrollo de un método aún más lucrativo para provocar convulsiones que dañaran al cerebro.
How is electric shock therapy done?
We use these electrodes. We place them on the patient's head like this. And then by means of this machine, we pass a controlled electric current through the brain, just for a fraction of a second. The patient doesn't feel it.
La historia detrás de esta cura milagrosa comenzó en un matadero romano.
In Italy, in 1938, two Italian psychiatrists decided to observe that before slaughtering pigs, in order to make the pigs more docile, they would apply electrodes to their temples that were hooked up to wall current, and that this stunned the pigs, but it didn't kill them, and they could then slaughter them. Well, this gave them the encouragement to try inducing convulsions with electricity.
We would see teeth falling out, broken spines, bones knocked out of joint, broken bones, and people even getting internal organ damage from being restrained while they were having these uncontrolled writhing seizures, convulsions.
Many patients have been returned to their homes and jobs who might still be here if it were not for this helpful form of treatment.
Después de vender exitosamente el daño cerebral como una cura, los psiquiatras buscaron maneras más precisas para atacar al cerebro. Esto se inició en 1848, cuando una explosión lanzó una barra de acero directamente a través de la cabeza de Phineas Gage, ferrocarrilero de Vermont. Aunque Gage sobrevivió, su personalidad se alteró drásticamente. 70 años después, el neurólogo portugués Egas Moniz intentaría obtener un resultado similar, taladrando el cráneo de un paciente y metiendo chorros de alcohol puro en el cerebro, matando el tejido de los lóbulos frontales. Moniz llamó a este nuevo procedimiento lobotomía. El doctor Walter J. Freeman llegaría a ser el practicante de lobotomías más infame. descubrió que podía hacerlas más rápido sin tener que taladrar el cráneo.
There was no anesthesia, and he would just lift up the eye and stick nothing more than an ice pick right into the brain, right under the orbital bone, and then just rake the thing back and forth until he was satisfied that he had caused enough disruption of brain tissue, and then pull it out.
Freeman viajó por el país en su lobotomóvil, mutilando el cerebro de sus pacientes en el escenario o a veces en el mismo vehículo.
And he would pull up and offer lobotomies to people, get referrals from the local doctors, or sometimes people didn't even go through doctors. They'd go right to the lobotomobile, and he would just do the brain-damaging procedure right there.
Cuando sus privilegios quirúrgicos le fueron revocados después de haberle causado la muerte a su último paciente en la mesa de operaciones, Freeman ya había realizado o supervisado más de 3.500 lobotomías, en las cuales él mismo admitió que a más del 25% de sus víctimas las había dejado en un estado vegetativo.
They lobotomized 1 million people in the 40s and the 50s and beginning of the 60s until they came to the conclusion that this was a destructive treatment.
Pero aunque las curas milagrosas pronto fueron denunciadas como fraudes que dañaban el cerebro, los psiquiatras se mantenían un paso adelante, inventando nuevas formas de psicocirugía, presentándolas como avances médicos.
I completely shuddered from head to toe. And that's what I heard in my head when he drilled something in my brain.
Northwest, actually, the centre home.
I'm sorry I had to do that.
Yeah, why did you have to do that?
I went, oh, funny, and all.
Did you?
My head all shook inside.
Oh, dear.
Oh, my head shook inside.
Yes, all right.
Everything shook, the eyes, everything, the teeth.
Oh, that's well, well.
That was grievous bodily harm done to my brain. And nobody has the right anyway to play God with somebody's brain.
The whole operation took about 8.5 hours, and they kept me awake for every second of it, and I remember every second of it. And I still remember it to this day because I have this operation every day of my life. Whether I like it or not, I have it.
Los psiquiatras aún alaban los beneficios de la lobotomía, un tratamiento que les da un ingreso de $31 millones anuales. Debido a la mala reputación de la lobotomía, los psiquiatras se apresuraron a poner de nuevo en primer plano al electroshock. Lo rebautizaron terapia electroconvulsiva. Hoy le dan anestésicos al paciente para apagar sus gritos y agentes paralizantes para evitar verles retorcerse en su agonía.
The main misconception that people have about ECT is that it's new and improved. The new and improved refers strictly to these cosmetic improvements because, in fact, they make it easier on the witnesses. The person isn't shaking all over the table. They're paralyzed now. It isn't new. It isn't improved. It is worse.
Every 10 years or so, there tends to be, first of all, a denial that it causes any harm. Secondly, an acknowledgement that it might have caused harm, but here's a whole new approach, and now this one is blameless, without any research to back it up.
The ECT machine can produce anywhere from 50 to 400 volts. It's the kind of energy that we use for industrial machinery that might be in a steel mill or a printing press, some large piece of machinery. It's an extraordinary amount of energy, and it causes a great deal of damage.
Y aunque se publican muchas historias de prisioneros que fueron físicamente maltratados con electroshock, la cantidad de electricidad aplicada por los psiquiatras para la terapia electroconvulsiva es 33 veces mayor. Ese daño se dirige más frecuentemente contra los más vulnerables. 2/3 partes de quienes han recibido electroshock son mujeres a quienes se les diagnosticó el síndrome premenstrual, el trastorno menopáusico o la depresión posparto. La mitad de los pacientes tratados con electroshock son ancianos. Una vez que se les acepta en asistencia social médica, estos ancianos reciben un 360% más de terapia electroconvulsiva que los de 64 años. ¿Y a dónde llega todo esto? A 40.000 muertos y a otros más que son incontables, con tal daño cerebral que no tienen esperanza de recuperar una vida normal. Por $12 de electricidad, solo los psiquiatras de Estados Unidos generan un ingreso de $5.000 millones. Pero la siguiente cura milagrosa que los psiquiatras agregaron a su arsenal les dio más dinero que nunca, ya que es más rápida, más barata y puede convertir a cada hombre, mujer y niño en un paciente de por vida. A principios de los 50, los psiquiatras descubrieron su siguiente cura milagrosa. Una sustancia química originalmente creada para matar parásitos en los cerdos. Su descubrimiento entorpecía la función cerebral de un modo similar al de meter un punzón en la cuenca del ojo. Era un viejo tratamiento con un nuevo disfraz.
With the advent of these new tranquilizing drugs, it seems not too much to say that we're on the verge of an entirely new era in the treatment of mental illness.
Nombrándola lobotomía química, el psiquiatra canadiense Heinz Lehmann describió el Thorazine como una píldora fácil de tomar, con el mismo efecto que la psicocirugía, pero sin ensuciar nada.
Thorazine provided psychiatry with the entry into mainstream medicine. It had its magic bullet. If I'm a psychiatrist and I have to spend an hour talking to someone in psychotherapy, there's only so much I can charge for that hour. But if I can come in, give you a pill, and send you back out in 15 minutes or 10 minutes, that's a much more efficient use of my time monetarily.
Lo que los psiquiatras no le contaron al público era que el Thorazine causaba una condición neurológica atroz, conocida como disquinesia tardía.
And that's a neurological syndrome where you have muscle twitches, abnormal jerks, which are uncontrolled, and they either last for a long time or sometimes they're permanent. So that's very clear, very well recognized long-term or permanent brain damage from these medications.
Mr. Blount has virtually no signs of his original illness now. The signs that the movements of his mouth are completely side effects of the drugs that he was on for 20 years. Mr. Blount is quite rational. He understands what's going on. And if you're patient, he can carry on a very rational conversation with you.
Even when you remove the drug, it may still remain. It means you have caused a permanent disabling of the brain. In the late 50s, you get the first signs of it, people starting to worry about it. But it's not until the late 70s that psychiatrists start warning their patients about it. 20 years.
El fabricante del Thorazine, SmithKline French, tenía buenas razones para ocultar la mala noticia. Tan solo el primer año, su inversión tuvo un rendimiento del 3000%. Con el público y la prensa sin conocer los severos e incapacitantes efectos secundarios, médicos y psiquiatras prominentes se reunieron en Puerto Rico para sentar las bases para difundir las drogas psiquiátricas en el futuro. El psiquiatra Nathan Klein escribió lo siguiente en el informe final de la conferencia.
The present breadth of drug use may be almost trivial when we compare it to the possible number of chemical substances that will be available for the control of selective aspects of man's life in the year 2000.
El Dr. Klein encabezó un movimiento que inundó con nuevas drogas psiquiátricas maravillosas el mercado mundial, apoyado por una masiva máquina publicitaria que gastó cientos de millones de dólares. La psiquiatría era ahora una industria de narcotraficantes. Para 1970, la Asociación Psiquiátrica Americana dependía tanto del dinero de las compañías farmacéuticas que el 30% de su presupuesto anual venía de anuncios de estas en sus revistas oficiales.
So we had money flowing to trade organizations, we had money flowing to the doctors, and to their journals. Well, we all know that that is going to influence how they think.
The majority of National Institute of Mental Health and National Institute of Health scientists are getting more money from drug companies on the side than their tax-based salary.
Con tanto dinero por ganar, todo lo que los psiquiatras necesitaban era una teoría científica para justificarlo. ¿La solución? Un informe oficial que declaraba que todos los problemas mentales derivados del llamado desequilibrio químico del cerebro requerían drogas para corregirlo.
This chemical imbalance is one of the greatest fallacies ever foisted upon patients and the public. There is no chemical test to show an imbalance related to any psychiatric disease, whether it's depression, anxiety, what have you.
The chemical imbalance is for the benefit of the psychiatrist. It has to be there so that psychiatrists can treat it.
Pero las fraudulentas teorías del desequilibrio químico no podían ocultar las crecientes pruebas de efectos secundarios comunes y aterradores, como la akathisia.
Akathisia is like an extreme inner nervous agitation. People describe it as wanting to crawl out of their own skins. And this happens with great frequency, and it is absolutely, totally well understood to be associated with suicide and violence and homicide.
Tras años de informes de esos efectos secundarios e incontables casos de violencia, automutilación y muerte, en 1991, especialistas en salud, legisladores y el público finalmente obligaron a la FDA a ordenar una investigación.
I know with absolute certainty that if Charles had any idea of the side effects of Prozac, he would never have taken it.
I had two sons, David Lee, age 8, Billy 16. Wife 20 years, all gone. I'll tell you why. After being on Prozac for 21 days, my wife shot and killed both of these two boys right here. She turned the gun to herself and shot herself twice.
I took the 9mm automatic, sat down on the bed and put the gun to my head. And I blew a 4-inch hole out the back of my arm instead of my head. Thank God I was a lousy shot. Had someone looked further into Prozac, steps could have been taken to avoid it.
Lo que se suponía que fuera una sesión imparcial era un panel de psiquiatras que en su gran mayoría tenía lazos financieros con las compañías farmacéuticas.
They basically couldn't find an expert, a doctor, a psychiatrist, at a leading medical school who basically in some way or another didn't have a consulting agreement, hadn't taken money from the pharmaceutical companies.
I do not find from the evidence today that there is credible evidence to support a conclusion that antidepressant drugs cause the emergence and or the intensification of suicidality and or other violent behaviors.
500 deaths, 33 murder cases, and over 20,000 adverse side effects. Would you like to tell me why this drug is still on the market?
Is there an alliance, an unholy alliance between psychiatric community, the pharmaceutical industry, and the FDA? And the answer is yes.
Esta alianza deshonesta se hizo muy evidente en 1997, cuando las compañías farmacéuticas persuadieron a la FDA a que se les permitiera anunciar directamente al público. Con los psiquiatras proporcionando aprobación médica, en solo 3 años, la venta de drogas psiquiátricas se disparó casi 2 veces y media. Cuando el número de víctimas de la violencia y el suicidio subió hasta las nubes, la indignación del público obligó a la FDA a publicar etiquetas con advertencias sobre los antidepresivos. Pero para entonces ya habían pasado 13 años, se habían hecho miles de millones de dólares y los psiquiatras comercializaban sus nuevas drogas milagrosas. Más del 8% de la población mundial ha tomado drogas psiquiátricas basadas en ciencia falsa y respaldadas por gente comprada que regulan las drogas. Sus dañinos medicamentos logran utilidades brutas de casi 27,000 millones de dólares al año. Y mientras los psiquiatras encontraban una forma de diagnosticar y drogar a cada habitante del planeta, en otro frente continuaban su asalto contra nuestras libertades más personales. Los psiquiatras exigen el derecho absoluto a determinar qué es lo mejor para el llamado enfermo mental. Después de todo, el enfermo mental está loco y no es capaz de evaluar su propio tratamiento. Para hacer cumplir su autoridad sobre los demás y mantener sus hospitales llenos a niveles redituables, los psiquiatras usan un método llamado internación involuntaria.
When you go to a real doctor, say a family doctor or a cardiologist, a patient always has the right to refuse treatment. So there is no such thing as involuntary treatment when it comes to clinical medicine as practiced by real doctors. Psychiatrists, of course, believe that people can be treated against their will.
En 1956, el psiquiatra Winfred Overholzer presentó un plan al Congreso en el que tenía la intención de llevar la internación involuntaria a un nuevo nivel. El plan era comprar 400.000 hectáreas de páramos en Alaska, construir un inmenso hospital mental y cambiar las leyes de internación para que se pudiera enviar a cualquiera con una simple indicación de un psiquiatra. El proyecto de ley pasó rápidamente por la Cámara de Representantes, pero cuando el público se enteró del plan, se enfureció, refiriéndose a él como Siberia, Estados Unidos. El Senado canceló el proyecto de ley. Pero aunque el fin del proyecto de ley Siberia detuvo sus planes a gran escala, la internación involuntaria seguía siendo el método más eficaz y lucrativo para llenar los hospitales psiquiátricos.
Again, the person has committed no crime and has no trial and is sent directly to a mental hospital, which is really a prison.
How many people go to an insane asylum and say, please lock me up? Doctors don't lock up anybody. Psychiatrists lock you up.
Incluso los niños pueden ser separados de sus padres, dejándoles poco recurso legal.
They just invaded our home. They came in with officers. Our kids were scared. You know, they come in with pieces of paper and say, you're giving us your kids. And it's like, you know, how can they just come in and do that?
She said, you could be arrested for medical neglect. And I said, but how was that when, you know, this is my child? And I see that he doesn't need that much medication. Why would you threaten me with something like that?
At 10 p.m., 2 policemen and 2 social workers came to my house and took all 4 of my kids away.
Una vez internado en un hospital psiquiátrico, al paciente se le droga y se le controla.
The more a person objects, the more this objection is construed as symptom of a mental illness.
At which point the person would be locked up in restraints. There would be the ankle, the knee, the waist, the head, the wrist, and the shoulder restraints. And if when that process was happening, if there was almost any resistance at all, the person then would be medicated to a point where they would almost be knocked out.
We had one case where they actually took a patient in a seclusion room and beat him up. And then they lied about it to the services that investigated. So it's a pretty wide range of abuse issues that we've encountered.
El personal psiquiátrico provoca a sus pacientes a la violencia para poder cobrar a las compañías de seguro hasta $1,600 diarios por cada paciente inmovilizado.
A patient would resist diagnosis, resist treatment, and also want to leave treatment while they were at the hospital. And invariably, every time, that person's situation would be exacerbated until they were put in constraints and medicated, at which point there would be documented reasons to keep that person in treatment.
La carga de tales sumas reclamadas se le cobra directamente al público en las crecientes primas de seguros de salud. En cuanto a sus víctimas, la experiencia es traumática e incluso mortal.
16-year-old Rochelle Claiborne died in Laurel Ridge's care last August. The state report shows during the restraint, quote, Rochelle stated several times she could not breathe.
In almost all respects, the staff behaved appropriately, followed the standards.
Aprovechándose de que las leyes sobre la restricción son débiles o vagas, a los psiquiatras y a su personal casi nunca se les acusa criminalmente por agresión con lesiones y asesinato.
He begged me to take him home, take him out of there, that they were treating him wrongly, and he didn't want to stay there. And I got a call that there had been an accident, that they held him down until he couldn't breathe anymore. I wish I would have listened to him, take him out of there before it had happened. And then I miss him every day. And I wish I could have him back, but I can't.
Hasta hoy, a nadie se le ha acusado por el asesinato del niño. Los ancianos son un objetivo importante del abuso psiquiátrico, con el tratamiento de ancianos en hospitales mentales que cuesta al gobierno y a las compañías de seguros más de $29 mil millones al año.
Unwarranted commitment has occurred that wouldn't have occurred if the people hadn't had insurance. The proof of that pudding is generally in how fast they get out once the insurance runs out.
Involuntary commitment is a form of psychiatric slavery, where persons are treated as if they're property and they are deprived of liberty, and people are making money in the process.
As long as we have involuntary mental hospitalization, psychiatry is a prison work. It's a crime against humanity. It is not medicine.
Cada minuto del día, alguien es encerrado involuntariamente en un hospital psiquiátrico. Y si crees que es algo que no puede ocurrirte a ti, o a alguien que conoces, piénsalo mejor. Cada 75 segundos en Estados Unidos, alguien es internado en contra de su voluntad. Y con más de $1 billón dedicados a los hospitales de Estados Unidos desde 1965, los psiquiatras se han conseguido un negocio muy lucrativo, oculto tras una interpretación dudosa de la ley. Pero muy a menudo los psiquiatras cometen crímenes demasiado flagrantes para ignorarlos.
The FBI has raided the headquarters of one of the nation's largest operators of psychiatric hospitals.
Hundreds complained of overbilling, misdiagnosed conditions, and insurance fraud.
Investigators say they found more than 5,000 similar cases in all 50 states.
Psychiatrists clearly are getting rich.
Psychiatrists traded drugs for sex, filed false insurance claims, and exploited patients sexually.
We have uncovered some of the most elaborate, aggressive, creative, deceptive, immoral, and illegal schemes being used to fill empty hospital beds with insured and paying patients.
Cada psiquiatra hace un juramento de seguir un código de conducta ética, de poner el cuidado de sus pacientes por encima de todo. Pero de todas las disciplinas médicas, la psiquiatría tiene el peor récord de fraude y abuso.
Psychiatry is almost a license to print money. If a doctor were clever enough, and many of them are, there's no reason that they couldn't make at least $500,000 a year fraudulently and get away with it in psychiatry.
I don't purport to have deposed every psychiatrist in Las Vegas. I can tell you for a fact I haven't. Maybe I've deposed half, and by and large they were a dishonest, deceitful, lying bunch of people.
Tan frecuentes son sus prácticas engañosas y criminales, las cuales facturan, que los investigadores de seguros tienen una frase de jerga para ello: el hola de California y el apretón de manos de $100.
$100 handshake is when usually a patient is institutionalized. Psychiatrist, psychologist will visit that person, shake hands with them, say, hello, I'm Dr. So-and-so, I'm taking care of your problem here, and then leaves.
They might have 10 or 20 patients there. They bill an hour for each one, and they might be in the hospital for a total of 30 minutes. So 20 patients, 20 hours, and they'd send the bills off to Medicaid.
We see that most of the victims of recovered memory therapy were women who had excellent health insurance, whether it was government insurance or private insurance, because many insurance policies wouldn't pay for this kind of long-term nonsense. So those people were targeted because of the nature of the insurance that they had.
Cada año, la industria psiquiátrica de Estados Unidos defrauda al gobierno y a las aseguradoras privadas por $40 mil millones usando cualquier medio posible para engañar al público.
There were some advertisements, very seductive advertisements, for people wanting to lose weight and were having problems losing weight. And they would be given, all expenses paid to go to a particular spa. But when they got to this spa and went in and signed in, it wasn't a spa, it was a psychiatric center. And then they couldn't get out.
What instead they received massive doses of mind-altering drugs, and they were kept for a lengthy period of time, and their insurance carrier was billed tremendous amounts of money for something that was unnecessary.
Pero sus mentiras van más allá del pabellón psiquiátrico y hasta los tribunales, donde como testigos pagados dirán cualquier cosa para cobrar sus honorarios.
A psychiatric expert who will have one opinion in one scenario and a completely opposite opinion in another scenario based on which law firm or governmental agency is paying for his time.
The psychiatrist on one hand will tell the public that suicide can be prevented, but will go into court and tell a jury that suicide cannot be prevented. And then once you show his prior inconsistent statements, you also show that he is paid very well by pharmaceuticals, then the jury says, you know what, we're not so sure about you because you just lied to us.
Añadamos a su codicia, deshonestidad y avaricia sus crímenes sexuales. Constituyendo tan solo el 6% de los médicos de Estados Unidos, los psiquiatras son responsables de la tercera parte de los delitos sexuales cometidos por médicos.
It has happened so often that by the mid-80s, the insurance companies who insure physicians across America started writing sexual claims out of the policies altogether. That's how common it was.
The system was so broken that more than 25,000 complaints had been registered, but nothing acted upon. When a psychiatrist has a patient, a female patient, and abuses them sexually, there's a very high probability they'll get away with it.
I've seen many cases where the mental health professional becomes very disturbed and is using very strange and odd treatments, and that can go on for many years with no one finding out about it because it's not very public. It's quite private. Things happen behind closed doors.
Trágicamente, sus crímenes sexuales a menudo implican niños. Un buen ejemplo es el del Dr. C. Markham Berry. En apariencia, un miembro muy respetado de su comunidad. Pero todo eso se hizo añicos cuando lo arrestaron por haber violado sexualmente a los niños. Sacaron de su casa camionetas llenas de pornografía infantil y la investigación posterior descubrió que había violado sexualmente a sus pacientes, niños entre 7 y 17 años a quienes fotografió y violó sexualmente. El Estado lo describió como los 50 años de una aventura sexual desenfrenada y clandestina de Berry con niños. Este no es un incidente aislado. Es el carácter cuidadosamente enmascarado de los miembros de esta profesión. En las ciudades, los estados y los países podrán encontrarse psiquiatras que cometen violaciones, abuso sexual, asesinato y fraude. Y como vas a ver, toda la credibilidad de la psiquiatría depende del mayor fraude de todos.
I was diagnosed with a chemical imbalance, manic depression.
They diagnosed me with having ADD.
He told me I had conduct disorder,
ADHD,
mild depression,
Major depression.
manic depressive,
Borderline personality disorder.
compulsive disorder,
Anxiety, depression, and schizophrenia.
Sleep disorder.
identity problem disorder.
There's no such thing as mental disorder. A mental disorder is whatever someone says it is, and if the person saying this is a mental disorder has enough power and influence, then people believe, oh, that's a mental disorder.
Pero no se puede tener poder o influencia sin credibilidad. Así que la psiquiatría fabrica la suya.
It's based on a grab bag of checklists for disorders that are published in a book called the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. There are no statistics in this book, by the way. That just makes it sound more scientific.
They create this cluster of disease, and they get together and they vote. Is this a disease? All in favor, say aye.
It's marketed as a scientifically based document. Now, the American Psychiatric Association, which publishes the DSM, do a lot of work to create an aura of scientific precision around the DSM, but it's not scientifically based.
Desde la primera edición del DSM, el número de trastornos mentales que se incluyó por votación en el Manual de Diagnóstico de la Psiquiatría ha llegado a 374. Y con cada nuevo trastorno, los psiquiatras crean otra forma de defraudar al público.
If you have 27 ways to bill in the DSM, that's 27 ways to bill. If you have 300, that's 300 ways to bill. So you can pretty much find anyone walking on the street that could fit into a DSM somehow.
When you build insurance companies, you can't say the word. You've got to say a number. And they have numbers for the most ridiculous things. You know, like arguing with your mother or peeing in the bed.
Adolescent rebellion disorder is an official psychiatric diagnosis. Arithmetic learning disorder is an official psychiatric diagnosis. General anxiety disorder is a recent diagnosis.
For each one, there is a 5-digit code with a decimal point. Now, the implication of that is if I have illness 403.16, that's different in some important and scientifically proven way from someone who has 403.17. And nothing could be further from the truth.
Aunque parezca increíble, mientras presentan el DSM al mundo como un hecho científico, los psiquiatras admiten libremente su absoluta falta de base científica.
We have no diagnostic reliable markers for almost any illness there is in the DSM.
What we're testing for in psychiatry, it's hard to say because there's nothing specifically.
But as far as a test that's clinically useful, basically we're not there yet.
We don't have any laboratory tests that we can use to determine whether somebody does or doesn't have a mental illness.
There are no good biological tests for detecting mental illness.
There is no test, there's no biopsy you can do.
There is no chemical test right now.
There are no specific tests to confirm the diagnosis or show the improvement, like any blood tests or any x-rays or anything like that.
Oh, in my practice I don't do any tests. I just speak with people and listen to them, and then I make a decision in what kind of illness.
Estos diagnósticos varían tanto como los psiquiatras que los dictaminan. En estas secuencias, tomadas con una cámara oculta, una persona visitó a varios psiquiatras quejándose de los mismos síntomas.
I'm extremely unorganized, and I didn't used to be. It's caused problems in the family. It's caused problems getting, I'm self-employed.
So you've got ADD, ADHD, you need depressed, and your depression is bipolar depressed.
If you have a brain chemistry disorder, it's probably genetic.
You have a lot of the symptoms of depression.
So it seems like it is a mixed picture. What that means is like we got some depressive symptoms and some, high symptoms.
If you're bipolar, I'll need to give you a mood stabilizer. We don't know. I kind of doubt it.
It's considered low-grade bipolar.
You are more of the ADD than ADHD. And as far as medications for depression, because I would recommend that you start a medication, which are Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, Celexa. Usually Propylene XR is pretty good.
I'll give you some Lexapro in the morning and some Trazodone at night.
Lamictal is a better medication for that. It works on your depression also.
But the treatment for any bipolar cycling is the same. Lithium.
Gramaron is another one.
Trazodone.
Segretol.
Lipigood, Wellbutrin.
Lexapro.
Lamictal.
Equitroid.
Depakote.
Lithium.
Ambien.
You may need an antidepressant also with your Lamictal.
We don't know if I give you a medication if it is going to work or not.
To a certain degree, it's trial and error.
You never know if it's the right drug.
How many people have I cured? Well, there are no real cures right now in psychiatry.
I have cured none of my patients.
We're always challenged by our lack of knowledge.
I mean, in fact, we don't know what the causes of mental illness are.
Most mental illnesses, we do not know the cause.
Of course, it would be nice to know exact reasons of disorders, but maybe in the future.
I'm the Director of Research at the American Psychiatric Association. We don't know the etiology of really any of the mental disorders at the present time.
DSM-5 is coming out. It's grown to 10 times its original size, and it labels everybody. I could find 5 diagnoses that would fit you or anybody else.
Compara esto con los métodos de investigación de la patología, una ciencia real que descubre enfermedades reales usando una amplia variedad de pruebas de diagnóstico precisas.
We do millions of laboratory tests as well as the structural examination and the microscopic examination. It's a whole series of applied scientific procedures. In the case of psychiatry, there isn't any laboratory tool that can precisely identify a psychiatric disease and allow it to be classified.
It's not as if there's some study of tissue or some study of the body or some study of matter. These are all categories which are made up. They're simply made up. They don't exist in nature. They're decided upon by psychiatrists and voted on.
Los psiquiatras no son los únicos que se benefician con el DSM. Siempre que se encuentre un diagnóstico psiquiátrico, se encontrará una droga psiquiátrica.
The pharmaceutical corporations now contribute enormous sums of money for the education of psychiatric residents and for the support of research by their professors. So that psychiatry today has become in America, has become very largely learning of which drug to use with which disease or disorder.
We need to make sure that we understand the very close interactions among the American Psychiatric Association with its DSM, the pharmaceutical companies, who love the fact that every time there's a new edition of the DSM, there are dozens more categories in there. And so more conditions for the drug companies to say, oh, we've got a pill for that.
En el 2006, un estudio reveló que el 56% de los psiquiatras que decidían qué trastornos incluir en el siguiente DSM tienen lazos financieros con al menos una compañía farmacéutica. Hoy vemos las consecuencias, un aluvión de drogas, cada una dirigida a un trastorno inventado que está apoyado por un diagnóstico arbitrario en el DSM.
The fact that it is couched in the language of science without necessarily having any of the scientific data or underpinnings to justify it is as threatening as anything we've seen today.
Y el último y más caro ardid para engañar al público al imitar a la medicina legítima: escanear al cerebro.
We can scan all the brains we want to. The fact that we see changes in different people's brains, changes in functioning, doesn't mean that we've discovered anything that has its origin in the brain. It just means that we're seeing changes, but it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the brain.
Psiquiatras y psicólogos usan el DSM para etiquetar a 450 millones de personas en el mundo como enfermos mentales. Un total igual a la población de Francia, Italia, Alemania, Canadá, Australia, el Reino Unido y Rusia combinadas. Mientras la venta de drogas psiquiátricas superó los 27 mil millones de dólares al año, los fondos de los gobiernos del mundo para esos pacientes le dan beneficios brutos a la psiquiatría de 440 mil millones de dólares al año. Y una gran parte de ello proviene del diagnóstico y de las drogas que se recetan a los más confiados y vulnerables.
We have swallowed all manner of poisonous certainties, fed us by our parents and school teachers. If the race is to be freed from its crippling burden of good and evil, it must be psychiatrists who take the original responsibility.
La declaración de Brock Chisholm ejemplifica la arremetida psiquiátrica directa contra nuestro sistema escolar.
They actually said that the purpose was social control, not to pass on knowledge, not to give him something so that he can go into the world of work.
En 1950, psiquiatras y psicólogos de todo el mundo se reunieron en la Casa Blanca para proponer una reorientación total del sistema público escolar.
The White House Conference on Mental Health in the 1950s was a landmark that served to bolster the idea that schools would serve their communities better as mental health clinics than they would as institutions of learning.
In the early 60s, the world of psychiatry started to really go places in this country. Little by little, it came into our schools, our educational system.
Y para 1965 se convirtió en ley. Se les dio luz verde a los psiquiatras para que etiquetaran y drogaran a los estudiantes al por mayor.
A child is labeled ADD or ADHD the minute he can't sit still for a 10-15 minute period of time, or he talks constantly or ignores the teacher completely. That will get him and earn him an ADD or ADHD label.
En 1987 se etiquetaba libremente a los niños con el trastorno del déficit de atención e hiperactividad TDAH. En un año se diagnosticó a 500,000 niños americanos con este trastorno. Para 1994, esa cantidad se había elevado a 4.4 millones. Como respuesta a la alarma pública generalizada por la aparente epidemia de enfermedad mental, los Institutos Nacionales de Salud, financiados por el gobierno de Estados Unidos, reunieron un panel de prominentes médicos y psiquiatras para explicar a los padres y educadores exactamente qué era el TDAH.
I would like any member of the panel to describe a typical ADHD in terms of symptomatology. Mark, would you like to? Since you see them in your practice.
I think the panel has been frank, and the difficulties here are immense in terms of these. It is hard. It's very hard to know how to answer this question. They cannot, even when. They are as if driven by a motive. There are some good clinical descriptions. And I think, I think part of the problem is the profession keeps changing the diagnosis.
At this time, we do not have a diagnostic test for ADHD. Therefore, the validity of the disorder continues to be a problem.
Pero esta escandalosa admisión no detuvo a los psiquiatras de las escuelas. 2 años después, el número de estudiantes americanos diagnosticados con el TDAH se elevó a 6 millones. Hoy, a 20 millones de niños en el mundo se les ha etiquetado con algún tipo de trastorno de aprendizaje, un diagnóstico a menudo hecho en cuestión de minutos.
We would sit behind a two-way mirror along with the parents. We would then look at the child. We would do small manipulative activities with them to see where their deficit was. It was wrong what we were doing. We were looking at a 5-minute glimpse of this child's life and saying, okay, here you go. Here's a little pill, take it, you'll be fine.
Esas pildoritas como Ritalin, Adderall y Concerta las clasifica la Administración para el Control de Estupefacientes de Estados Unidos como sustancias muy adictivas, igual que la cocaína, la heroína y la metanfetamina.
When I was on the Ritalin, it made me just feel totally different, like I wasn't even who I was.
I was, flipping out, was twitching, going crazy.
I felt like I was out of it all the time, like I wasn't there, I wasn't human.
You're just a zombie, pretty much. You do what you can just to get by and just don't do anything extra.
My mother never teased me, but she thought I really had ADHD and I was wrong, and I had something wrong with me. So I thought she'd feel bad and feel sorry for me if I died, but then again, I thought that she would miss me a lot, and I also love her a little more than I wanted to kill myself. And so I stopped when I realized that.
La abundancia de medicamentos recetados creó una nueva fuente de ingreso para los chicos: vender sus medicamentos a sus compañeros.
It's called kitty cocaine. They take the Ritalin and they just repackage it and they sell it on campus to the kids because it's like speed.
I figured if I was gonna do drugs, I might as well make it worth it. And I ended up doing street drugs, and then I ended up getting into it really bad.
We're looking at marijuana and other things as being gateway drugs, and actually the so-called medications are a greater gateway drug.
The Ritalin drugs are backfiring big time because if the child is already disruptive and he takes cocaine, he's going to be a lot more disruptive after he's taken it. It is not going to calm him down.
Boom, she got on the drugs and her personality changed, her behaviors changed, they became erratic and dark and violent, and it was just a nightmare.
He kept having adverse reactions, becoming very, very angry. He could not control his behavior, he couldn't control his temper.
He was on 5 different psych meds, Prozac and lithium, and he was 7 years old. And he was unable to function. He would have rages and then crying and all kinds of just violent rages, grabbing knives and all of this.
The list includes 15-year-old Kip Kinkle withdrawing from Prozac when he shot 22 classmates, killing 2 after murdering his mother and stepfather at his home in Springfield, Oregon. 18-year-old Jason Hoffman on Effexor and Celexa when he opened fire at his California high school, wounding 5. 15-year-old Sean Cooper on a mix of antidepressants when he shot students in Idaho. And 17-year-old Eric Harris on Luvox when he and partner Dylan Klebold killed 12 classmates and a teacher in the bloodiest school massacre yet, Columbine.
Y todo esto eclipsa la mismísima razón de que los niños acudan a la escuela en primer lugar, para recibir una educación. Desde 1970, Estados Unidos ha caído del 9º al 28º lugar en el mundo académico. Durante ese mismo periodo, el número de estudiantes americanos etiquetados con trastornos de aprendizaje se disparó y la venta de drogas para el TDAH se multiplicó 32 veces.
Children don't ask for psychiatric drugs. Children don't ask to be diagnosed. They don't want to be called crazy. So you ask the classic Roman question, legal question, cui bono, who benefits? The people who make the diagnosis.
Psychiatry should actually go into government, that politicians should listen to psychiatrists. Psychiatrists should be in every parliament and should direct and monitor political activities.
En poco más de un siglo, la psiquiatría se ha infiltrado en la sociedad a escala global. Y no fue un accidente.
People aren't aware that in 1940, a prominent British psychiatrist, Colonel J.R. Rees, addressed the National Council on Mental Hygiene and set the agenda for psychiatry for the next 60 years. Since then, psychiatrists have been given authority in nearly every sector of our society, with tragic results.
We must aim to make it permeate every educational activity in our national life. Public life, politics, and industry should all of them be within our sphere of influence. We have made a useful attack upon a number of professions. The 2 easiest of them, naturally, are the teaching profession and the church. The most difficult are law and medicine.
El colega de Rees, el psiquiatra G. Brock Chisholm, cofundador de la Federación Mundial de Salud Mental, más tarde detalló los planes de la psiquiatría.
To achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas.
Para implementar su plan maestro, los psiquiatras americanos convencieron al Congreso de Estados Unidos que la enfermedad mental era una amenaza nacional que solo ellos, con un enorme aumento de fondos, podrían resolver. Y así comenzaron los enormes gastos del gobierno de Estados Unidos para la investigación psiquiátrica, que ha escalado de $1 millón al año en 1946 a $1.4 mil millones hoy, un incremento de más de 139,000%. Al esparcirse la influencia psiquiátrica en Estados Unidos, también se esparcía en todo el mundo. Detrás de cada crisis mundial se encontrará la mano de la psiquiatría. Por ejemplo, el psiquiatra serbio Jovan Raskovic, quien exigió la limpieza étnica de croatas y musulmanes debido a su firme creencia en su inferioridad racial. El resultado fue Bosnia en la década de 1990, donde el colega de Raskovic, el psiquiatra Radovan Karadzic, y el primer ministro Slobodan Milosevic establecieron campos de concentración en los Balcanes, donde una vez más se torturó en masa, se violó y se asesinó a inocentes. Un psiquiatra militar explicó cómo se hizo.
C'est très difficile tuer millions de personnes. C'est très difficile, techniquement difficile. Les Allemands étaient bons techniciens et ils ne pouvaient pas, ils pouvaient seulement 6 millions de Juifs exterminés. Ils massacrent, par exemple, 100 ou 200 de personnes, ou viole sans femme et sans jeune fille. Pour que les autres sont effrayés, échappent. Alors vous avez le terrain pur.
Con el condicionamiento de Pavlov de un siglo de antigüedad, unido a las técnicas modernas de control mental, psiquiatras y psicólogos pueden convertir al hombre promedio, e incluso a los niños, en asesinos en masa.
You could train them to use firearms indiscriminately. You could train them to shoot people with very little feeling or thought. You could train them to use abusive and brutalizing procedures in order to obtain information with no hesitancy, with no concern.
Así es como se crean los terroristas. Después del 11 de septiembre, Osama Bin Laden fue calificado como el cerebro detrás de los ataques. Pero el experto reconocido y comandante de Al-Qaeda es Ayman al-Zawahiri. Educado en psicología y farmacología en la Universidad del Cairo y autor del manual de entrenamiento de Al-Qaeda sobre el uso de la psiquiatría coactiva. Y quien orquestó las explosiones terroristas en Madrid fue Abu Hafiza, otro agente de Al-Qaeda, que se basa en las mismas técnicas de manipulación mental.
You can implant memories. Memories are potent sources of motivated behavior. If you implant enough memories of specific kinds, you can shape and change the nature of human thinking and feelings.
And it was thought to be a kind of ultimate weapon because what greater weapon could there be than control of the human mind?
You can control minds and you can move people around, particularly when you control their lives. It's easier to control their minds.
When we look at psychiatry and psychology, social control is the primary agenda.
Y esa agenda se está poniendo en vigor en el mundo, ahora mismo, con campañas de chequeo mental presentadas al público con nombres tan inocuos como chequeo de adolescentes.
The national government is actually encouraging it and wanting to test every single kid in our public school system.
All children are put under this kind of a test for psychiatric evaluation, a 10-minute test that tells them absolutely nothing.
I predict that upwards of 90% of all the people screened will be diagnosed as having a psychiatric disorder, which means that we'll have an entire generation that will be a perfect profit center.
El hombre detrás del programa de chequeo de adolescentes es el psiquiatra David Schaefer, asesor del Departamento de Defensa de Estados Unidos.
They're not just screening children to have complete control of the 52 million children in school. They're screening now, and that bill, they will screen their parents, and they will screen all adults in America.
The idea of mass screening for mental illness in the American population, run by a government initiative, is one of the scariest ideas I ever heard of.
Psychiatry is politics, has always been politics. It is politics pure and simple, because psychiatry was always the application of force against people who don't want to be forced.
It's a sad thing, and parents better wake up. Society better wake up, because we're in serious trouble if they don't.
El plan maestro de la psiquiatría de infiltrarse en todos los sectores de la sociedad se está convirtiendo en realidad. No tenemos una epidemia de enfermedad mental, tenemos una epidemia de psiquiatría. Se puede y se debe hacer algo al respecto. Fundada en 1969 por la Iglesia de Scientology, la Comisión de Ciudadanos por los Derechos Humanos investiga y expone violaciones psiquiátricas de los derechos humanos. Desde su sede internacional en Los Ángeles, California, CCHR documenta las prácticas de intrusión y destructivas de la psiquiatría y publica sus hallazgos en 15 idiomas. Se han distribuido más de 8 millones de ejemplares a los profesionales del cuidado de la salud, funcionarios del gobierno, educadores y líderes empresariales por todo el mundo. En la sede también se presenta la exposición de renombre internacional titulada La Psiquiatría, una industria de la muerte. Centrada en 14 documentales, esta exposición novedosa presenta la historia de la psiquiatría. Desde sus orígenes, donde al enfermo mental lo enjaulaban como un animal, hasta hoy en día, donde existe una drogadicción masiva de la sociedad como la cura para trastornos mentales inventados. Versiones itinerantes son llevadas a cientos de ciudades a través de 5 continentes, abriendo el camino para que cientos de miles descubran por sí mismos la tenebrosa verdad detrás de la psiquiatría. Lo que es hoy un movimiento global por los derechos humanos empezó hace 30 años con una lucha por la libertad de un individuo, Víctor Ghiori, internado por la fuerza en un hospital psiquiátrico en Pensilvania.
He was interviewed by a psychiatrist who said, I can't understand a word this man is saying. He's incoherent. Obviously a paranoid schizophrenic. Commit him, which they did. Now, he wasn't babbling incoherently, he was speaking Hungarian. We filed a lawsuit against the hospital. In the middle of the case, the doctor who was the head of the hospital stands up and he says, we want nothing more to do with Victor Ghiori.
La liberación de Víctor Ghiori fue la primera de entre miles de casos de todo el mundo a los que CCHR ayudó.
CCHR challenged involuntary commitment laws throughout the United States and internationally, and what we found was that people were being incarcerated without any legal rights.
They had no right to an attorney. They could be drugged, shocked, lobotomized without their consent.
Ejemplo, Australia 1977. CCHR expuso una práctica psiquiátrica llamada tratamiento de sueño profundo.
Patients were being knocked unconscious with a cocktail of barbiturates and other psychiatric drugs, and they were being subjected to electroshock treatment daily, sometimes twice daily, without their knowledge. Deep sleep treatment had led to 48 deaths.
CCHR lo investigó, lo expuso y luchó durante más de una década hasta que el tratamiento del sueño profundo fue prohibido. En Sudáfrica, CCHR expuso campos psiquiátricos en los cuales se encerraban a los pacientes mentales tratándolos con crueldad para luego enviarlos a trabajar como esclavos. En Italia, CCHR trabajó con legisladores y medios de difusión llevando a cabo redadas en hospitales psiquiátricos cuyas condiciones eran brutales, y CCHR hizo que se cerrara. En Japón, CCHR expuso los crímenes financieros de los psiquiatras y los hospitales que estaban defraudando al gobierno y a los contribuyentes. Se juzgó a los culpables y los hospitales se cerraron. Y en Estados Unidos, CCHR destapó un fraude de $1.000 millones dentro de la cadena más grande de instalaciones privadas para salud mental. 600 agentes federales hicieron redadas a lo largo de 20 estados. Docenas de juicios siguieron, se impusieron multas por millones y toda la cadena corrupta de hospitales se fue a la bancarrota y cerraron permanentemente. Y tras cada advertencia que vemos hoy sobre las drogas psiquiátricas se encuentra CCHR.
CCHR has documented the side effects of these drugs, has taken evidence to the FDA, has gone to Congress, has obtained congressional hearings.
It took 13 years before the FDA finally admitted that those drugs can cause suicide and issued black box warnings. We got 9 state laws passed. Following that, it was the introduction of the Child Medication Safety Act in 2004.
Tan solo en los últimos 3 años, organismos internacionales reguladores de las drogas han emitido más de 50 advertencias que exponen los peligros de las drogas psiquiátricas.
History has told us every workable method that could be used to help people who are seriously disturbed, who do need some sort of treatment, has been suppressed and smashed by the vested interests of psychiatry and the pharmaceutical industry.
The public's largely been getting their information from the industry that benefits on putting them on psychiatric drugs. It's an advertising campaign. It's not science, it's marketing.
CCHR is causing things to change by being champions for a growing number of well-intentioned people who are risking their professional careers to speak up against the abuses of psychiatry.
Having that support from a group like this has made a tremendous difference in what I feel personally that I've been able to accomplish.
So I think of CCHR as fellow soldiers.
I'm unaware of any other organization that does the kind of work that CCHR does, particularly on the scope and the level that they do.
CCHR has been very effective at moving the ball down the field.
one at a time, one state at a time, one legislator at a time.
CCHR has had the resources to be able to teach and have legislators become more aware of what the problem with the psychotropic drugs are.
CCHR has researched the issue. When you need the facts, you go to CCHR.
Hoy en día, CCHR tiene más de 300 filiales en docenas de países por todo el mundo. Donde sea y cuando sea que los psiquiatras infringen los derechos humanos, CCHR lleva su mensaje a las calles. Desde Estados Unidos hasta Japón y desde Canadá al Reino Unido, miembros prominentes de CCHR encabezan marchas para asegurar la protección y la libertad del abuso psiquiátrico para todos.
It's essential that CCHR does their job and gets the support to do their job, because the extent to which they do, the whole vehicle that's out of control about psychiatry gets to be contained and gets to be eliminated. It scares me to think if this doesn't happen. I've seen up close what it's like, and it scares the daylights out of me.
You have 100,000 people electroshocked every year. You have 17 million children worldwide taking mind-altering drugs. You have people being involuntarily committed every 75 seconds, and it's all under the guise of mental health.
The only way that you are going to get humane treatment into the mental health system is to take psychiatry and the vested interests out of the picture. And only then will you see people truly obtaining mental health.
You have two choices. Either you pretend you knew nothing about it, or you do something about it. With knowledge comes responsibility. That's why we're here. That's why people are joining forces with CCHR.
Miles de personas de todas las clases sociales y religiones ya se han unido. CCHR investiga y expone las violaciones psiquiátricas de los derechos humanos y continuará haciéndolo hasta que las prácticas abusivas y coactivas de la psiquiatría cesen y se le devuelva a todos sus derechos humanos y su dignidad. Se necesita tu ayuda. Únete a nosotros en la lucha.